There's a tangible air of anticipation in the room, which is great. Welcome back. I'd like to welcome everybody to this, the SPA's 102nd physical conference. Last time we met face-to-face was on the 27th of January, 2020. 6 weeks later, the world plunged headfirst into a pandemic that would threaten our very existence, curtail our freedoms, reprogram human behavior, and change the way we do business. Since then, the SPA has mobilized and delivered, as you've seen on the previous presentation, we've delivered 3 online conferences, delivered 3 virtual sales masterclasses, and hosted members' Zoom meetings every fortnight. We did the mental health first aid training course and an industry induction course for new employees entering the industry, hosted by myself. We've done our very best to keep abreast of all relevant guidance and facilitated members meeting virtually, sharing experiences, asking questions, and we've continued to formulate best practice and generally support the sector through regular communication. I'd formally like to thank at this point the CPI, the Confederation of Paper Industries, for working closely with us and helping us with our messaging. As an industry, I believe we have a voice. We've been heard by BAYS and government, and importantly, our messaging to the industry during this difficult time has been good. However, nothing compares to face-to-face, and it's brilliant to see you here today, networking, socializing, you know, the way we've done it for 37 years. So on a personal note, I'm delighted to see you all and so glad we're back to this format. Great to see so many people here today. We did have 100, a few fallers at the last hurdle, but we're just above 90 delegates, representing over 50 sheep plants. Now that's a good turnout. You know, to get representation from 50 sheep plants is good. A number of new members and faces as well. I won't name you all as I normally would because we've got a lot to get through today and timing is critical. I would, however, like to make special mention to our event sponsors. These events don't just happen. They take a lot of time, preparation, and money. So thank you very much to Konica Minolta and Domino Printing UK. You'll hear more from our sponsors later today. For the benefit of first-timers, there are a few of you about. I can see some unusual faces. I don't mean unusual in that way. For the benefit of first-timers, and those of you who've been asleep for 11 years, Ken, I'm Tim Gray, and I'm chairman of the Sheep Plant Association. And over the last 11 years of my chairmanship, we've really focused the SPA's activities on identifying threats and opportunities, working out how best to cope with those, so the agreed best practice, and how we can install that within our businesses and our plants, ideally at no cost or at low cost and quickly. So that's really what the Sheep Plant Association is about. I liken the SPA to a head office. If you were in a large group of companies, you'd have an HR department at central office, you'd have a well-established health and safety system, you'd have a legal department, you'd have someone there to specialize in mergers and acquisitions. So I liken what we do in the Sheep Plant Association as a head office function. We want to be the go-to resource for help and support in all aspects of your business. And with your input and guidance, we can hopefully make your businesses great businesses and excellent businesses going forward. So I always remind you, and I have to remind you, please don't discuss anything that could be deemed as sensitive under current competition law. Don't talk about pricing and commercial matters, please. That's great. Also, quite a poignant moment yesterday. I just wonder whether we might like to just spare a thought for Jimmy Greaves' family and friends. Very sad that he's passed. He was a good friend to the association, and although he was a reasonable football player, he was also a reasonable cardboard box maker. And I was reminded today that Nick Kirby's father actually supplied machinery to Trio Packing Materials when Jimmy was actually at Chelsea. So he was training, and he told a lovely story when he was with us a few years ago that he was actually doing deliveries on the morning he'd go training. So he'd take the lorry out and he'd take the lorry to Chelsea and actually train there. So yeah, our thoughts do go out to Jimmy's family and friends. So okay, a little bit of housekeeping. There's a little bit more than normal because we're in different times. No fire drills planned today, so if the alarm does go off for a prolonged period, we do need to get out of the building. We're fortunate that most of these doors open and there's exits everywhere. The meeting place is at the front of the hotel and the car park. We take your safety very seriously, so I would just like to reiterate our COVID protocols, if that's okay. With the hotel's help, we've created a lot of space and ventilation, and have access to the outdoor space at breaks and after the conference is finished. We do actually have a CO2 meter, which I can see is green at the moment, so that is actually testing the air to make sure we've got suitable ventilation and we're not getting a build-up of CO2, which would suggest we need to open some windows. So you do have adequate ventilation here. Feel free to wear a mask if you wish. There is no compulsion to, but if you feel that you're in a crowded area by the bar or there's a lot of people in a corridor or whatever, feel free to slip it on. You won't offend anybody, so wear a mask if you feel you need to. There are hand sanitizers dotted around, included up here if anybody would like to use it when they're handling microphones and things like that. Now we have a real need to stay on schedule. I'm already gone on too long. So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. You've seen it's a great show. So let's crack on. Our first speaker will be known to most of you. I'm delighted to introduce to you Richard Noble OBE, who, according to Wikipedia, and I had to write this down, and I quote, he's a Scottish entrepreneur who was holder of the land speed record between 1983 and 1997. He was also the project director of ThrustSSC, the vehicle which holds the current land speed record set at Black Rock Desert, Nevada in 97. And having read Richard's book, which is here, he's also a big risk taker, and I mean a big risk taker. So hopefully he'll share some of those stories with you. He's also, claim to fame, a good friend of Michael Whitaker. So there we go. Excellent. So if the AV is ready, strap yourselves down for a high-octane 110,000 brake horsepower, maximum G, blast to the past and present, and give Richard a rousing SPA welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. I've been looking forward to this. I knew this was going to be a really good show, so I'm going to really do my best for you, and I hope you'll enjoy this and find it different. As you know, as a country, we're currently living in a good old mess, and Brexit and COVID are causing enormous changes. One of the downsides of the old EU membership was the loss of British identity. And today, we don't even know who our friends are. America is changing very fast indeed, if you listen to Mr. Trump. And the EU are in a real mess, and they don't like us. So the time has come for our country to gain a new reputation, build up the international trade, and mend that very serious education deficit. We've been trying to help with the record breaking over the last 40 years, and we discovered one of the most powerful education stimulants. This is absolutely amazing, and I'll come on to it in a moment. So let's move on. It all started for me in 1952, when Britain was a really dull post-war place with yet another war threatening. My dad, stationed in Scotland, took us for a drive around Loch Ness in the Hillman Minx, and I saw John Cobb's amazing water speed record boat, Crusader, where he was headed for 200 miles an hour. It sort of became very important to me to study the performance in engineering and find out just what all this was about. It was incredible to see somebody doing something like this in sort of post-war Britain. So 22 years later, I built the first car, Thrust 1. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and it was very, very dangerous. The Meteor jet engine pushed it along at up to 200 miles an hour, but then we had a spectacular crash with a triple airborne roll. I was rather pleased, actually, because when it was upside down for the first time, I did manage to get the engine shut down. I climbed out, and we did the most sensible thing, as every accountant will tell you, go straight to the scrapyard and flog off the remains. So that gave us 175 quid, so we were still solvent. Time was moving on, and what we've got to do, obviously, is move on to the next one. We learned everything we could from Thrust 1, and so we started the Thrust 2 program. And Thrust 2 was designed by a brilliant engineer, John Ackroyd, and used the upper engine installation from a supersonic Lightning. Okay, so we're now moving into the proper area of decent power. And Thrust 2 was built in Ranelagh Works in Fishbourne on the Isle of Wight. As I said, we had an opening balance of 175 quid, and from then on, the entire project lived off financial sponsorship with the help of 250 companies. So it became an enormous engineering effort, combined effort to put this together. It was one hell of a fight to exist. We had no identity. We were completely unknown. And by 1981, we'd actually completed the car, and also we achieved the British 1 mile land speed record of 248 miles an hour, which involved 2 passes over a 1 mile time sector on a 1.9 mile runway. So we normally end up 12 foot from the end of the runway. That record has never been beaten. It took us 3 goes to get the world land speed record. We went to Bonneville and we ran there up to 500 miles an hour, but it was just really dangerous because we were using wheels which had no tires. They were very high performance, innovative wheels. And eventually we found a new site called the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. It's now famous for the Burning Man experience, where 70,000 American intellectuals strip off, paint themselves in bright colors, and run around Starkers for a week. Thrust 2 is a brilliant engineering example. It achieved its design speed of 650 miles an hour, and I could drive it. Have I got the right one? Yes. I could drive it to a lateral accuracy of 1.5 inches at 650 miles an hour. We did get quite close to the edge there when John was a bit worried about the weight on the front wheels, so he increased the angle of incidence of the car by a very, very small degree. And this resulted in a situation where I was within 7 miles an hour of takeoff. But we got the world record, and I'm really glad to be here. So you really are taking the risk, really pushing forward. There we go. And after that, we moved on to the design, build, and certification of a new light aircraft called the ARV Super 2. There's a world market of about 30,000 units there. And we developed this airplane using a new lightweight bespoke aero engine, and the forward structure was made of very tough superplastic aluminium. When we achieved our certification, we flew 3 into Heathrow, and the CAA chairman came to hand over the very hard-won type approval certificate. And when BA discovered that the chairman was on site, they actually rolled up a Concorde for the never-to-be-repeated shot. There you go. Getting out of Heathrow was an absolute bloody nightmare because we were in these tiny little airplanes, and of course these huge airliners were sort of surrounding us, and any one of those could blow us away. It was really scary. So I got airborne on runway 27, made a sharp left-hand turn to Bagshot and Farnborough and got the hell out of it. Of course, we had endless trouble when you're trying to do something like this with the British establishment. The aircraft was actually very, very safe, and I've got some 400 hours on ARVs. And then one day, the engine stopped, and I made a forced landing into a field near Burton-on-Trent and the A38. The approach was very difficult because of the engine problem, which caused a big problem with the radiator, and it meant we had to do a very steep space shuttle type approach, and the aircraft turned over on landing. The superplastic aluminium took this impact, and it saved my life. The RV has to be one of the strongest and safest light aircraft ever built. We built about 40 of them before the city got fed up with us. Then I was back on the Bonneville Salt Flats in 1990 to report on an American challenge to our record. It didn't succeed, but my old friend Craig Breedlove showed up. And Craig had held the world land speed record 5 times before. He was the first over 400, 500, and 600 miles an hour. And he was now working up to a project to be the first through the speed of sound. This is a huge, huge undertaking, and nobody had ever done this. Once back in the UK, I found myself in a complex situation. The McLaren Formula One team were also after the sound barrier, and there was much bravado and arrogance. But you can't treat record breaking like this with all the innovation and everything else in the same way as a Formula One race. And we knew that they would fail, which they did. So here's the very controversial design that they came up with, but they never took it any further. The Americans got into a hell of a trouble because on one of their runs, they got up to 670 miles an hour, and then the car turned on its side and did a U-turn, and that's known as the fastest U-turn since Margaret Thatcher. Our team set about delivering the supersonic car, a very innovative design powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Spey afterburning turbofan engines from a Phantom fighter. It gave us just over 100,000 horsepower. Driver was Andy Green, a fighter pilot with 3,000 hours of fast jet time. But the most important person in the entire project was the engineer Ron Ayres, a 60-year-old aerodynamic missile designer. Ron wanted to use the new technology of computational fluid dynamics, which enables you to analyze the aerodynamics on your computers, never before used for a car design, and he wanted to verify it with rocket testing. So let's move along and see the rocket test. This is worth watching. This is at Pendine in South Wales. It's coming. Yes. So here's our rocket sled. We're on 1.4 kilometers of track. We're going to run up to 900 miles an hour. The important thing is that when we come to run, I'll just advise you, don't blink. Just do not blink.
One puffer only functioned. Wait.
Don't blink. That's 0 to 820 miles an hour in 0.8 of a second. So it's sensible. It was an extraordinary experience. We were given a batch of rockets by the Ministry of Defence, and then we had to compare that with the data that we got from the computational fluid dynamics. And here's the original document. And you can see there is a straight line correlation. Never, ever been achieved before. It was an extraordinary situation, and that meant that we could go ahead and do it. The project was a very long haul and very, very difficult. We tested in Jordan with the help of my friend King Hussein, and finally made it to Black Rock Desert in 1997 to run for the first ever supersonic record. So have a look at this. And again.
Full video, run number 61, looking for Mach 1.02, 720 miles an hour indicated.
So this is Andy Green driving the car. He's sitting in the middle there between the 2 engines. And what we have to do with the car is to accelerate very, very slowly initially, because the sheer power of the engine sucks up vast quantities of desert. So he's now got his instruction to accelerate now. So he's lining up down the track.
Okay, goals on, shots away,
he's going to run for 13 miles. He'll do it in under 2 minutes. Okay, now this is all British. Remember this, it's British. This is the sort of thing we can do in this country.
That's leading, which is a nice change.
So he's accelerating very slowly, rather like a milk float at the moment, until he gets to 70 miles an hour. Then he can open up the engines, and eventually he lights the afterburners, which are the big flames at the back, and that comes in at about 200 miles an hour, and then we're off. So he's accelerating very, very slowly.
80% nozzle closed.
And you want to look for the shock wave, which builds up on top of the cockpit.
30 miles an hour.
Okay.
Looking for mill.
Looking for mill, which is full power from the engines, but without the afterburner. He's got to mill power now. He's going to min burner, lighting the burners, making sure it's good on both sides, and I can open it up.
Focus now, Mr. Dog. C15 coming up.
There we go. We've now got full power at about 220, 230 miles an hour. Still pretty slow, but getting there.
450.
Comes back in a moment. Slight drift off to the left because we've got a supersonic airflow around the rear wheels. And he turns the steering wheel hard right and brings the car back online and holds it at Mach 1.02.
20 into the measured mile.
He's in the measured mile. You can see the shockwave over the cockpit. And now he's out of it. So now it's just a matter of getting the parachute out decelerating,
550,
bringing it to an
4
end,
to go.
far end, and
530,
then refueling for the mandatory
2-1,
return
good
run.
shoot. Both oils, no worries.
It's a lovely feeling when you've just completed a run, you know, open the cockpit, fresh air, and you're still alive.
Man, that was hard
Brilliant.
work. Going down to 300, looking for the recovery crew, can't see them.
Yeah, down to 300
Just on the
now.
outside, recovery crew visual. $200, how are we doing on recovery? Looking nice, about a mile to go. $150, engines off.
Engines off. He's now coasting in now.
0.4 of a mile to go. 120 miles an hour, braking now.
Wheel brakes in, 120. Bring it to a halt. And then open the cockpit. Get that fresh air.
Fractioning over, that's no bad thing. Gonna need the extra run.
There you go.
First station SSC, the car is stopped. Oh, Yahoo!
And that is the famous picture of the big, huge shockwave. And nobody has ever done this before. This is a world first. And it was 1997. Okay, the supersonic record was a huge achievement and generated great excitement and enormous interest for the country. Our website was the largest in the world for 2 days. Whilst the team members who made the achievement possible were Ron Ayres, the aerodynamicist, and Andy Green, Britain responded badly to the achievement. Andy was given an OBE, and it took us 17 years to get an MBE for Ron, the aerodynamicist, without whom we could never have done it. Much easier if you're a civil servant or a media star. Anyhow, in 2005, the Americans were back on the trail. There we go. Steve Fawcett was the man. Steve had made his money in Chicago futures and held over 100 world records, including the amazing first and only solo ballooning around the world. Looking for the next challenge, the supersonic record took his fancy. Here was a challenger of incredible determination and skill, with all the financial resources to match. This would lead to an incredible global battle for the world honors. As usual, we were starting with nothing, but we had just an empty company. Reckoning that Fawcett would go for 850 miles an hour, and he could get there faster than us, we decided to head for 1,000 miles an hour. That's Mach 1.4. This would give us the fastest ever airplane low-level record. No aircraft can do this. The research, design, and build of the car was a huge, drawn-out, expensive struggle to exist and deliver. It would eventually take 11 years and consume 31 million. But that's not a bad sum, actually, for a very high-technology vehicle with the likes of a modern jet fighter. But the real story about Bloodhound is the education. It started with the Eurofighter frontline jet fighter. Ron, who was doing our design, wanted a modern jet engine for the car, and somehow Andy Green got us a meeting with Lord Drayson. Paul Drayson was then the Minister of Defence Equipment in the Labour government. The meeting was a friendly one, but Drayson wasn't going to support the project with the jet engine. So Andy and I got up to leave the meeting, but we were suddenly called back. We got as far as the door, and he called us back. And the Minister explained his problem. He was having huge problems recruiting for the Royal Air Force. The UK education standards were poor and dropping. He remembered the huge effect the Concorde project had on British engineering and education, and he wanted us to do the same. I shook his hand and told him we would just do it. The secret of the education project was the fact that we were going forward with this huge supersonic challenger, and the kids all wanted to learn about it. They just absolutely lapped this thing up. And by 2017, it had become the largest STEM program in the country, engaging with 127,000 school kids and students a year. And it was also being followed, of course, all over the world. Of course, we got our engines. Here's the NASA figures. Drayson was on the right line. Here is the US government study on education effect of the NASA Apollo program, the inspiration generating vast numbers of physics, engineering, and mathematics PhDs. So that was the model that Drayson was working to. The Bloodhound program became increasingly difficult as it progressed. It needed ever-increasing funds, and by 2017 we were in with a chance. It was an amazing situation, but against all the odds we landed a massive Chinese sponsorship and a very specific 4.5 million grant offer from Joe Johnson, who was then the Minister of Transport. This had resulted from a huge program which had been initiated by Chancellor George Osborne to establish the value of projects like this for Britain. Clearly, he came to a positive conclusion. To meet the grant terms, we found we got to deliver in just 8 weeks. It was incredibly difficult, but we made it in full. We achieved absolutely everything. We met with the government team, handed over the contracts, ticked all the boxes, and asked for the money. Now, in our experience, when something magic has actually been achieved against all the odds, there's great excitement on both sides, but there was no excitement on the government side, and they seemed absolutely lost. It was a very, very strange meeting. They eventually responded with a culture of strategic deferment. There were to be no more meetings. I went to China to apologize for the UK government's default and to advise them that we would not be going for the record in 2017. The Chinese, quite understandably, responded by cancelling their deal. The project was left with minimal resources, and to show all our followers that we actually had a car, we decided to run it for the first time in October 2017. 10,000 people turned up to Newquay Airport to watch this, and this video covers the education day when we had 3,000 school children on site. It just shows what can be achieved and how well the education strategy works. So let's just have a look at this.
It's going to be really nice to share our excitement that we've had over the last 3 weeks with the general public. I think they're going to be blown away.
Racing car on Earth, and it feels like it.
Because it's really fun and you get to learn like lots of things that are really scientific.
I've absolutely loved it today. It's just amazing seeing the car finally run.
So you can see it really works. It really works. It was just a shame the project was wrecked by our own government, and I had to put it into administration. It was sold for a song, and the new owner saw the car run to 628 miles an hour on our track in South Africa. There appears to be no further activity, and the car is engineless in a museum. So what happens to a team that's effectively destroyed by its own government and has 81 million views on YouTube? Well, we've got to move on, haven't we? We've really got to move on. There's something good here. And let's move on. And we are moving on. We're coming back with a new high technology program which will provide much needed innovation, inspiration, education, and we all hope another dose of success for the country. And if you want to learn more about this, Shirley's brought a few copies of the latest book called Take Risk. So we'd be delighted to take your money. Thank you.
Richard, that was fantastic. I've never seen so many people glued to a presenter, certainly not when I'm on the rostrum anyway. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. If you haven't read the book already, I'm not a great reader, but Richard very kindly sent me a copy of the book, and I read it cover to cover without stopping. It is awesome because it takes you through pretty much all the projects and a few more that aren't mentioned there, but it's more about the risks that were taken and the very small things that made something possible or impossible. So it was a fascinating read, so I recommend you take a copy. It's a great book.